Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and joining me on the show, ESPN's Kevin Seifert, who tried like crazy to convince anybody who would listen that the Vikings were going to miss out on all the quarterbacks. They were going to pick Spencer Rattler in the fifth, and they were going to cry the entire night long. That's not what happened, Kevin. Take accountability for your bad draft hot take to start the show.
No, what I was doing, and I thought that I did a public service, which was to give people the broad range of possibilities that could happen. And they actually got closer to the Rattler scenario than they did to like the ideal scenario, whether that was, I don't know if that would be technically Caleb Williams, but certainly they were closer to Spencer Rattler than they were to Drake May.
Okay, sort of. I mean, they still would have had, even if they had missed out on McCarthy, they still would have had at least one other
Right.
first round caliber quarterback.
Right.
They didn't
Yeah.
come that close to missing out. Although, when I will say, when Penix was taken, I did go, oh, I mean, it wasn't totally unrealistic that the Raiders and Denver could just suddenly jump them to 9 and 10, take the quarterbacks, and then we're talking about Spencer Rattler and Michael Pratt.
It had all the makings of a panic run, and we talked about that. Somebody was going to do something stupid or something that was at least irrational or at the very least unexpected. And I think, depending on your point of view on the Falcons, that was one of those three words could be used for what the Falcons did. And so, yeah, I mean, I think they were going to end up with somebody, even if it was the sixth quarterback, which would have, I assume, been Nick's. And they probably felt pretty good that they weren't going to lose out on anybody. But I still think that it was somebody had to blaze the trail of the catastrophe scenario, even if it was unlikely to happen. And I was happy to do it.
And did it? You did. You made it interesting through draft season to talk about that. But I do want to know your take on this, because I have not seen anyone use the word that I was afraid of battling throughout the summer, which was settle. I
Yeah.
didn't want to have 1,000 fans in every live chat saying they settled. They settled. That would have been Bo Nix. If they
Mhm.
had taken him, they would have said they settled for Bo Nix, because the mock draft universe thought that J.J. McCarthy was the fourth overall draft pick or fifth pick, and the Vikings would have to trade up. It feels much more steal-ish than it does reach-ish or settle-ish. Do you think that this was one of their ideal scenarios, or the one that they did have to settle for?
I think it ranked below their ideal scenario for sure. I think we all probably know to different degrees of certainty that if they'd had their preference, it would have been Caleb Williams, obviously. And then if they'd had their second preference, it might have been Drake May. And so, like, whether that was realistic or not, I don't know. But they had to go into this whole process dating back to before Kirk departed and be comfortable with really any of the top 5 or 6 guys, because as we saw it play out, and especially in the beginning of March, no one knew how that was gonna play out. And if they had only liked a few of those guys, or if there was one guy they were willing to hold their nose in draft or something like that, then that was poor process, and they probably need to be more aggressive to keep Kirk, frankly, at least for a little bit, before they, were ready to replace him. So my sense all along was that I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I said they have to like 5 or 6 of these guys. So I do not think they settled. I think what they had set up, at least in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's mind, was tiers of quarterbacks and values. Like, if they were willing to give up a lot more draft picks to get Drake May because they felt that ultimately they would not need to build as strong of a team around him for them to be a Super Bowl type team than they did for a J.J. McCarthy or a Bo Nix, or maybe even a Michael Penix. Obviously, a Michael Penix, because they didn't trade up to get him either. At the 4 and the 5, and so that you can I guess parse through all that, but my sense was that they went into it knowing that they would be okay with and not settling. But what they weren't going to do is give up too much to get a Penix, a McCarthy, or a Nix, and then be unable to use any other draft picks to build around them, or to be really bereft of picks for the rest of this draft and next year as well. with a quarterback that they liked, but didn't necessarily think would be likely to become the next Patrick Mahomes.
Which is what really makes me wonder about the not trading up. Was it a product of the fact that Arizona and the Chargers, that these teams knew they were getting tremendously good prospects if they stayed where they were? And I think that there must be a league email that goes out that says, say you're open for business, say you might trade. This is television, people.
Yeah.
Like we want, but at the end of the day, it never seemed like Arizona was serious about trading out of that pick, or that the Vikings were not willing to give up all that extra draft capital for McCarthy, or maybe it would have been Penix at that point.
Yeah, I don't think that from what I can tell, I don't think that the Vikings were willing to give up even 23 to get up to 4 or 5 to get. They didn't view McCarthy as significantly better prospects than whoever might fall to them at 10 or 11 or whatever, um, to give up that much value, frankly. And so, even if you look at what the Mike Reese from ESPN reported that they offered for number 3 to get May with at the Patriots, I think was 11, 23 next year's first, but then also to get 2 picks back. And I had been told that 11, 23 and next year's first was way too short anyway. And so, I don't want to say it wasn't a serious uh, effort if that in fact was their final offer, but the value that they were willing to give up to move up was not nearly enough what it was going to need to be. And so I don't would Arizona or the Chargers have left if had moved down if the Vikings offered them 11, 23 and something else? Maybe, but we'll never know for sure, and we don't know if anyone else offered that, but the Vikings just weren't willing to go there.
It's a difficult thing for me to interpret what I'm supposed to make out of the Drake May offer. In fact, that they're asking for some middle round picks back. Like, what does that even mean? Why would that happen? Is that a draft chart that somebody has? But also, I don't think the Patriots were ever serious about moving out of it. And it says to me still that the Vikings being willing to move the extra 2 picks beyond what they already had at number 11 versus only moving up 1 spot to McCarthy would say that they had a significant gap between their first option, assuming Caleb Williams was off the table completely, but their first option of Drake May and whether it was Penix or McCarthy. And it
Yeah.
sounds, not just sounds, but their approach looks like they would have been happy with Penix or McCarthy with the fact that they didn't trade up. So if we're trying to sort of chunk these things of how they felt about it by the results, it seemed like Drake May was significant, but they were not willing to give up the entire franchise to do it. They're not willing
Right.
to send Justin Jefferson, as Boston Sports Radio thought that they should be doing the entire time. But they did view it as May was quite a bit more above the other guys, and that they would have been okay with at least 2 of the quarterbacks that were on the board at number 11.
Right. And so whether they viewed there being much difference between McCarthy and Penix and even Nix, I guess we can debate, but there was that a gap, I think we can all agree, between those guys and May in their minds. And on the issue of Jefferson, and it was fun to talk about, but my understanding is that, like, what the Patriots were kind of putting out there was that if they were going to move all the way down to 11, like, they had to come out of that draft with a premium player, whether that was by only moving down a couple spots and then drafting a premium player and then having the extra draft picks, or acquiring one as part of the trade. And if you get to 11, defensively you probably had a chance to get a premium type player, but you never know for sure. And like 11 is not necessarily considered a premium spot to get a true blue chip player. And so the Vikings were probably going to have to include, whether it was Jefferson or not, like a Christian Darrisaw would really be the only other player that would probably fit that profile. I mean, the Vikings have some good players, but in terms of what a Patriots type team would be looking for, it'd probably be Darrisaw, and I don't think that was really an option either. So really, in the end, like, number 3, was not an option. Not a realistic option based on where the Patriots were thinking and where the Vikings were thinking. They gave it a shot. They never would have known if they didn't try, but they were not in the same solar system, it doesn't sound like.
If you could guarantee to me that Drake May would become Josh Allen, then I would say trade pretty much anything. I'm okay with trading a receiver who's at the top of his game, a left tackle, doesn't matter. But I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah put it well when he said, what are the odds of that? If the odds of that
Yeah.
are 1 in 10 or less of a prospect with his profile, because I think that the truth kind of ended up in the middle with Drake May, where he is a tremendous prospect who could have great upside. But if we're starting to, it's sort of like this thing with the Wolves with Anthony Edwards, where we jump right to Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Whoa, let's
Yeah.
not jump right. Like, can we at
Yeah.
least stop off at Vince Carter first before we go to Michael Jordan? Same thing with Drake May. Can we stop off at Matthew Stafford as a
Yeah.
top comp before we run right to Patrick Mahomes? If his ceiling was truly Patrick Mahomes, then he probably would go number one. There's maybe one guy with that in this draft. Now, the McCarthy plan is very interesting to me because this team is going to tell us through rookie minicamp, OTAs, training camp, all the way through. They're going to tell us we want to be patient. Do not you dare put any expectations on this boy. And he is unbelievably young.
Yeah.
And when we think about quarterback peaks, they're like 25 to 30, right? And so we're years away from him being the best version of himself. But do you think that there will be pressure in real application? It's easy to say, but as we go along into a training camp, into a season, to play J.J. McCarthy quickly?
I think that actually depends a lot on Sam Darnold, as crazy as it sounds. Like, Sam Darnold can keep that noise to a minimum if he opens training camp and he looks like he's in charge of the offense and he looks like he's, you know, understanding where to go, and the practices are running smoothly. And I don't know what plans, if any, they would have for preseason. In the old days, you could say a rookie could beat out a veteran in the preseason. I don't know. I assume they'll play McCarthy. I don't think they'll play Darnold. I don't know. Like, can McCarthy beat out Darnold through training camp without a preseason battle? And we've already heard some veteran players talking about how much they like Sam and their hopes that that he can have a great season. And so if he does enough in the summer, and then they're competing early in the season, that maintains a minimum of noise. People are always going to ask. I was joking with Kevin O'Connell that, like, I'm going to have to figure out new ways to ask him if McCarthy is ready this week, or to get updates on McCarthy without being completely monotonous, and over. But it's something we'll be asking about pretty frequently. But if Sam Darnold has the type of season that the Vikings have kind of been advertising that they think he has a chance to have, then those questions will be at a minimum. Now, if they start losing despite how he's playing, or he starts playing poorly, that's where, I don't want to say pressure, but that's where, like, the questions become more credible. Because if he's playing poorly and or you're losing, what's the benefit of continuing to run him out there versus the benefit of whatever development McCarthy can get by playing in regular season games? I will say, though, that everything I've heard Kevin O'Connell say, in formal interviews, off to the side, in every which way, is that he's extremely wary of using any criteria other than his judgment and the coaching staff's judgment about McCarthy's readiness to be on the field as the determining factor for whether he plays. Obviously, if Sam Darnold gets hurt, then I would assume that makes McCarthy the likeliest guy to come next. But absent something like that, like, I don't think he wants to have his investment in McCarthy impacted. And I think he really does believe that you can damage and or ruin a quarterback by putting him on the field too early. I don't think he wants that investment damaged because of something that, the way Sam Darnold's playing. And so I don't know what that means or what that could happen in the meantime, but I really truly do think that this is not just an attempt to uh, remove the pressure from McCarthy to be the week one starter, or to not give him anything more to worry about than he's already probably got on his plate. I really do think that the reason they paid Sam Darnold what he got versus any other random bridge quarterback is that they really did think that he gave them a chance to bring whoever they drafted along as slowly as that player needs to be. Now, they could be 3-0 with Sam Darnold playing pretty decently, and if behind the scenes McCarthy is just killing it, then I think it's possible that could happen too. So I don't think that they're going to hold him back based on how Sam Darnold plays, but I also don't. I really, really don't think that unless barring an injury, that they're going to allow the way Sam Darnold is playing to get them off the schedule that they've established.
Let me juxtapose how much sense it all sounds like it makes with also Mark Wilf telling us at the owners' meetings, oh, we expect to win. We
Yeah,
expect to be competitive every year. And you mentioned 3-0. What about 0-3?
right.
And we can always say to ourselves, hey, you got to be patient. You got to be patient. And it's a lot easier for us sitting in the press box to say that than it is over in the owner's box for them to say that. And we also saw Nick Mullins throw 4 picks and Kevin O'Connell go to a rookie quarterback last year who was not ready and got pummeled against the Green Bay Packers on national TV, which we all kind of were like, it's fine. The season's over
Yeah,
anyway. But I mean, knowing what we know about how ready he actually was, should have definitely played Nick Mullins and stuck with that. So I guess I'm always hesitant to say, oh yeah, well, they'll just do this, because once the season clicks on, everything is different.
yeah, and I tend to downplay, at least with this organization, and maybe I'm being naive about the impact of pressure from ownership. I mean, I know that those guys ask questions. I know they're intense competitors, especially Ziggy Wilf, and they show that, just wear that on their sleeve. There's no doubt about that. And as they've owned the team longer, a lot of their kids are getting involved, and I know that they have, will be in the room sometimes when these things are being discussed, and that's totally normal. But like, if there were reported examples of the Wilfs effectively pressuring a personnel move that's significant, not a disciplinary thing, not a decision about whether to suspend Adrian Peterson or not, or anything along those lines where you would expect an owner to be involved. But if they've effectively exerted pressure to uh, on the personnel side to make a decision that wasn't otherwise going to be made, um, I guess I don't know what that would be. And so, if there were examples of that happening, that had been reported out and that we knew about, I would be more worried about it. Like, of all the reasons, that a bad decision could be made or a hasty decision could be made involving J.J. McCarthy, I don't think it's going to be a direct result of pressure from ownership. Now, could Kevin O'Connell, I'm going to do that a lot with the Irish names, so just be ready. Um, could Kevin O'Connell infer that the owners are going to be wanting that and then make consciously or subconsciously speed himself up? Maybe. Um, could that come up casually in conversation? Possibly, but like that, of all the things that are here, I don't know. But in the end, and you talked about Jaron Hall, like I felt that that decision was made in both cases because he literally felt he had no other options. And so the question would be like, because in the first go around, literally Cousins gets hurt, Nick Mullins is on IR, Josh Dobbs has been there 4 days. You have to start Jaron Hall, and no one disagreed with that. The way that Nick Mullins was throwing interceptions, um, it was so counter to everything they had been preaching that I think he felt he couldn't credibly trot Nick Mullins out there in a game that still had playoff possibilities or consequences if they won, uh, and continue to do that. Um, and so, does that mean they need to have another option in addition to Sam Darnold to protect JJ McCarthy? That would be awfully an awfully deep quarterback room. Maybe they would throw Jaron Hall out to the Wolves and just not be as worried about his development if it was to protect JJ McCarthy's. I don't know, but I will say that at least as we start on this process, I really do think that they're as girded against the typical pressure to rush a young quarterback as you can be.
So I agree with all of that. And I also just sort of have seen these things like best
Yeah,
laid plans
no, I know.
when we get into the season and everybody is, as under pressure and is amped, or, when people get frustrated, they do things that might not be the most rational thing to do. And I guess what I am just suggesting is hold back, restrain if you're the ownership, restrain if you're Kevin O'Connell from wanting to push him in, because it just can't be said enough that he just turned 21 years old. And in my opinion, it is important for someone who has thrown so few passes in college to have this time to, at least even if it was 6 weeks, to understand how the weekly cadence of an NFL room goes, and work with O'Connell and work after practice and do all those things to feel truly ready when he gets out there and not be overwhelmed. I don't know about ruining players, if that's really true. I mean, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks in their rookie year get their tails whooped and then come back and become very good quarterbacks. It's probably a guy to guy type of
Yeah,
thing,
right.
but you don't want to risk that unnecessarily. So here's something I've ignored really since the day that it happened, which is expectations for Sam Darnold. There are some folks who think, hey, they found the diamond in the rough with Sam Darnold, that ignore anything you saw with the Jets, and he could be a really great quarterback for them this year, compete for the division. And there are others that would be closer to my camp that are sort of in, it's fine. It's fine because he can start, and I think he'll mostly throw the football to the right place and then otherwise throw it to the other team. And, it could be really entertaining because there could be a lot of touchdowns and a lot of picks and a lot of deep passes and so forth. But I don't have, if he has to start the whole season, very high expectations for Sam Darnold based on his past history.
Yeah, and I'll keep saying what I've said about him because I think it continues to apply. Is his ceiling is that he plays well enough that what we just talked about earlier, rushing J.J. McCarthy, um, that he doesn't add to that, that he doesn't make them go any faster than they otherwise already will have. Now, does that mean that he's winning games? Does that mean he's throwing for 300 yards? Does that mean he's not throwing interceptions, which has always been an issue there? I don't know, but he's here for one reason. And now that they've drafted their next quarterback, we can, put the lid on that. Like he's here to hold it down until the next guy's ready and to not make them have to speed up their what would otherwise be the ideal or as close to the ideal development plan for JJ McCarthy as they can do. And so um, I know Phillips was talking about, the times when he was in college at Stanford and he's playing against him and he has sort of the college Sam Darnold in his head of somebody who, could really dominate some games at times at the college level. And he also made the point, he's like, they're in the same draft class. And he said, Harrison Phillips said, I'm feeling like I'm just getting into the prime of my career in terms of the combination of still having the physical skills, but also the experience to apply to that before I, basically lose the physical skills and it doesn't matter how much I know. And that could very well mean that Sam, would be in that same spot. So, um, and that's part of it as well. And so that's where my ceiling is for him. Like the floor is that he, comes out in week, 1 or 2 and just throws, loses games, and he's done that before in his career too. Um, and this is a pass first offense, as far as we know, while they might change the schemes and the route trees and all that in terms of exactly what's best for Sam and eventually what's best for JJ McCarthy compared to what was best for Kirk. Um, I still think that this is, going to be an offense where he's going to have to drop back and make big throws. And so, if they set him out there to do that and he's throwing interceptions and you can't even like watch it anymore, then that really becomes the floor of his expectations.
It could be like Nick Mullins on steroids, where it's, even more of the making crazy throws. Like
Yeah.
Nick Mullins, if he throws the ball faster, if he plays 17 games, is it a 40 touchdowns, 25 interceptions type of
Yeah.
season for Sam Darnold? Because we know that they're not going to just stick to the run. There is a world though, and I thought of this and how funny it would be and how Vikings it would be if Sam Darnold's just terrific and he throws for 35 touchdowns, 10
Yeah.
picks. They win 12 games. And then they go, now what do we do?
Yeah.
We did not plan on this at all. And now what do we do with JJ McCarthy? There has to be a bar, and it's very high, but there has to be a bar where they would be like, remember that first round quarterback? Let's just forget about that.
Yeah.
Sam Darnold is our guy. But it would have to be way up there.
Yeah, and then also like what would kind of contract would Sam Darnold be looking for at that point too? If we're just playing out the fantasy, Because you would ideally what you say, okay, like, we'd love to have him, we'll do that again next year. We'll be happy to have our young guy who's now 22 spend one more year in the Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers track, which seems to work pretty decently in around the league. And but yeah, he'd be silly to take a 1 year type contract, even if it paid him. Maybe they could franchise tag him, I guess. But that wouldn't that be a hoot to see that happen? But again, like that would my guess is that almost all of the time spent, hashing through that scenario will just be pure fantasy and ultimately fun to talk about, but not productive.
Yeah, it's sort of like when they make the announcements when you get on a plane. It's like water landing is highly unlikely, and it's like you're not even you're,
As you fly from Kansas City to Minnesota, a water landing is highly unlikely. Yes.
right, right, and not only that, but statistically, the what you're describing is not just
Yes.
highly unlikely; it's like preposterously unlikely. And
Um,
the same thing is probably goes for this, where
yeah.
it's like I need that announcement. Like
Yeah.
Sam Darnold throwing for 50 touchdowns is highly unlikely, but so yeah, I mean, I wonder what he would have to do to make the decision hard on them of whether to franchise tag or how JJ McCarthy would have to look to make the decision hard on them going into 2025. Uh, so when we talk about McCarthy, there's a discussion that I'm not sure I'm fully comfortable with, but I totally understand, which is about JJ McCarthy's ceiling. It's talked about as being, now I've said Matt Hasselbeck, or people have brought up Alex Smith, sort of these game manager types who have a little next level to them and have won a
Mhm.
lot of football games. And that's kind of how we look at it. But I also think that trying to judge someone's ceiling off of their college performance when it's in such a small sample is really hard to do, and that he has physical tools that could make that higher. So, what in your mind is a JJ McCarthy ceiling?
Um, so Yeah, because I hate the comp thing too. But the one thing that I've been thinking about, Jeremy Fowler did a story where he basically asked people to come up with comps for all the top quarterbacks, and I think the one that he came up with for McCarthy was Kirk Cousins. Um, and I assume that's from a physical standpoint. Uh, but like one of the things that a lot of the people around who watch, if you're a Michigan fan, like you don't have to be somebody who's inside the program or around JJ McCarthy's inner circle to know that there's a lot of kind of swagger there, and there's a lot of competitiveness that I think is probably deep within Kirk somewhere, but we didn't always see it throughout his career. That like we saw it a lot in 2022, but like just taking charge of a game or using the skills that you have to just, believe that you can take over the game. And so, and that's kind of what you need, I think, to win a ton and to win in the playoffs too. And so, like, that to me is the intriguing part of him, and that's assuming that the physical part all lines up because, I mean, Kirk, from a physical standpoint, at least as a passer, was is that's a pretty high ceiling. If you told me right now that JJ McCarthy could be the passer that Kirk Cousins is, like, I'd say that's a pretty high ceiling. And then you say, well, he seems like he's got a little bit more movement to him. Um, and a willingness to move around, and they ran some read option with him, I think, not a whole lot, but like that's there. But like really, like the part that intrigues me about him is just the confidence and the swagger that he plays with, and if that can lead to a level of competitiveness that sort of eluded Kirk for most of his career, then I think that's a pretty attractive ceiling.
There's a few things that are off about that comp, mostly everything, because I mean, first of all, we're
I'm
talking
shocked to hear
about,
you say that of all people.
but it doesn't make a lick of sense. I mean, JJ McCarthy is a wildly better athlete than
Mhm.
Kirk Cousins. The reason Kirk Cousins was not believed in out of high school and is a fourth round draft pick is because he's a terrible athlete by NFL standards. And you can use relative athletic score to see this, that he is legitimately the worst athlete from his NFL combine scores in the entire NFL. I mean, that's just an objective measure of what he did. That is not JJ McCarthy. McCarthy is much, much faster and
Yeah.
has a much stronger arm than Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins has made his bones with anticipation throwing, with accuracy, when playing on time, with executing and leading an offense. But J.J. McCarthy is a IMG kid who went undefeated, made Mr. Florida, and was recruited by everybody in the country, goes to the top program, wins the national championship. These are two very, very different humans. And one is a head case because of the other stuff. That is Kirk Cousins. Because he was drafted in the fourth round, because it was Washington, because of the RG3 stuff, the guy has always had this thing, this, I call it a chip on his shoulder,
Yeah.
or not enough belief in himself, or he thinks that everybody doesn't like him, which is why he takes the most money to go to Atlanta. And then it's proven that nobody fully likes him by them drafting Michael Penix. And it's just, there was a lot of baggage with Kirk Cousins that came along with that whole deal that does not come with McCarthy. This guy has been, I'm the man since fifth grade. He's
Yeah.
believed in himself as this. And when you talk about that swagger and that confidence, he comes in fully believing, I have won everywhere I've been, and I'm a top 10 draft pick, and I'm a top elite athlete in the world. Like, to me, those are just so crazy different. That, are we just looking at white quarterbacks who aren't that tall and saying
Yeah,
they're Kirk Cousins?
and I don't know if that comp comes from like what like the a comparison of what J.J. McCarthy is projected to achieve versus what Kirk Cousins achieved, meaning a long-term starter, somebody who be be on teams that compete for the playoffs, but isn't going to take them on his own to the Super Bowl, or whether it means that he'll play a lot like Kirk, and that I don't know. Like I think, as you point out, like that's probably not likely, but maybe if the comp is that somebody thinks JJ McCarthy is going to be a long-term starter who, you know, is on teams that are, in aggregate 500 and occasionally gets the playoffs, doesn't make any playoff runs, then that is, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's a defensible one to make in terms of that level of like of what a quarterback can do. And that gets back to what we talked about in terms of how the extent to which the Vikings were willing to mortgage their future to get him. And they really probably weren't. They they wanted to save it so they could use all their picks on Dallas Turner, as it turned out. But that's another story. But uh, and so like they gave themselves a chance to get a premium pass rusher, and then next year they'll at least still have their first rounder, although not much else to continue to build around them. And and if you go back and like listen to everything the coach O'Connell said, and that the general manager said, and all the scouts, the different personnel people who talked over the weekend said, like, nobody said like, you know Fran Tarkenton Jr. is walking in that door. They were being pretty like straightforward that one of the guys that we liked was available. We took him and we're ready to go to work.
Yeah, you're right about that. And someone asked me last night on the live stream, like, does O'Connell seem as excited as he did before the process? And I think that he might have thought they had a legitimate chance at Drake May. And, but I don't know if he did
How?
or not.
Yeah, like he might have, like, I don't know, like, but, like, knowing what we know now, like, I don't know why they thought were in the universe to get him.
Right. So then they would have been comfortable and happy with these quarterbacks. I think that what it comes down to is, once you've got the guy, then it's terrifying. Then it's like, okay, oh man, my whole career is resting on the shoulders of that young kid in there
Yeah.
who looks like he's barely out of high school. And, that's a scary proposition.
It's funny you say that. My daughter's in high school, and, like, he's a little bit bigger, a little bit more built than the guys that I see, when I go to the high school, or go to high school sports, or see her, with her friends. Like, it's not I mean, and he's really not that far off from being one of those kids, and so the same bushy haircut that they all have, and everything else. And so, it is funny, and, like, and that to me, like, there's a little bit of that I was thinking about, not so much just how he looks young, but, like, his body probably still has some development to do in terms of, like, getting heavier and stronger and thicker, to maintain himself throughout, the pounding he's gonna get in the NFL. And so, like, that could be another reason to think that, like, it wouldn't be smart to rush him. Like, you could physically forget the mental and psychological parts about what, repeated failure as a rookie can do to you. Like, physically, you get broken, like, let's give him a chance to be physically fortified to play a full NFL season before you start entertaining putting him out there.
It's gonna be such a change for me because I'm the same age as Kirk Cousins, and so he would be like, "Guys, remember Juan Gonzalez or something?" Like some '90s baseball player, like, "Oh yeah, yeah, sure." They're playing Creed songs, like, "Oh yeah, I was in high school when they're doing the Creed thing, and that's what Kirk likes." And I can promise you, J.J. McCarthy is not bringing that music to the locker room, and his references of sports. He's going to talk about growing up watching Kevin Durant or something, and it's going to
Well, at
be
least
really
he,
weird.
like he's 1 for 1 as far as I'm concerned because, like, the first sports reference he made after joining the Vikings was Wayne Gretzky, and so, like, that's my era. If not, I think he's actually probably older than he definitely is older than me, um, like, I felt pretty decent that, like but this is, like, his mentor that he, read about in a history book. It's not somebody he grew up even probably watching. I'm trying to think of the exact timetables, but my guess is he didn't see a whole lot of Wayne Gretzky live playing games, and so as he was growing up. But at least the first name he mentioned was somebody I recognized.
He is a big hockey guy. If he drops like an Artris Urbe or something, or some deep goaltender reference,
Yeah,
then I'll be impressed. But the rest of the team, so we could get off of how young JJ McCarthy is, and we aren't. But
yeah.
the rest of the team, when I look at this roster now, is we are near completion. There may be one more guy who gets added here or there, but this is an entire roster. I look at it as if you just took the starters and you turned injuries off, this team could potentially be competitive for a playoff spot. My issue is that I don't even know who the backup guard is. Is it the seventh rounder they just drafted? Like there's so many positions where you go, what's even after the top two wide receivers? If somebody
Yeah.
gets banged up, we're talking about Trent Sherfield season or something at this point. I mean, but the roster where they have it, I believe has the bones to build on, and I think has enough players to be competitive week in and week out, that close games are still going to happen like crazy at US Bank Stadium, and that throughout the season, players will get chipped off the roster because of injuries and things like that, or out of the lineup. And it will likely look like it did last year, where there's a lot of close games, but it's probably not going to be enough to be a truly competitive team. How do you feel like where they stand as an entire squad?
I think that they'll, it has to be. I always like to start that by saying like context is key, and like the context of them being in the 2024 NFC North is a lot different than the 2022 NFC North probably, and so they could actually be a team that, absent of what's around them, is a playoff contender, but they're playing in arguably the best division in football right now. And we can go through it, but like I think everybody just accepts it. The other three teams, certainly the Lions and Packers, are primed for a deep playoff run, you would think, and the Bears seem much improved, and so I think that it's weird, like overall, like the expectation for the team would be like they would be competing for the playoffs in December, which last year we thought was a terrible thing, at least from a long-term building standpoint. But I think universally, people, just because of the quarterback swap, would look at that and say, "Hey, that's a good first year of the rebuilding, the second phase of the rebuilding process." And so, my guess is that we're going to get to the end of this season, and people are going to be pretty enthused going into the off season. Does that mean that they were in it until week 18, or does that mean that there was just enough good things that happened that people are going to be like, okay, now we get JJ McCarthy gets a full off season. Justin Jefferson presumably is locked in. Don't have to worry about that. The defense. There's all kinds of fun parts on the defense that Brian Flores, assuming he doesn't move on after, to a head coaching job, which they probably feel pretty decent about given how little interest he got, unfortunately for him, this previous year. And that's kind of how I see the team. And I, and it might end up being that they don't make the playoffs because they have to play the Packers twice, the Lions twice, and the Bears twice. But I think that whatever the final record ends up being, that I guess I'd be really surprised if they get to January 2025 and people are not really excited for the season that would start 8 months after that.
It reminds me of maybe 2014, where our expectations should be of you've got the exciting young quarterback and you're
Yeah.
going into it with, hey, someday this could be something. And I think people enjoyed that 2014 season. A lot of finding out, a lot of close games, a lot of fun games, even if you're not quite there yet, because you could see what was on the way. Last thing, I want you to predict, and you love predictions. So I try to force you to do this
Yes.
on every time you come on the show. The exact date where we get the Adam Schefter alert that says Justin Jefferson has agreed to a $34 million per year contract extension with the Minnesota Vikings. What will that date be?
Hmm. May 15th.
I I thought you were going to go later into the summer because I was going to say May, and I
Yeah.
thought that was going to be a hot take, but
Yeah.
I think it's on the way soon. I
Yeah,
think it's
I think
happening.
it's on the way, and I don't have any great, like, scoop insight on it, but, like, just the general things you hear and the amount of time they've been working on it and the way Kwesi adofo-Mensah talked about it over the weekend, like, ultimately, it feels like a matter of time, but, like, it could be pretty quickly.
I think it's going to happen way before training camp because I do not believe they want J.J. McCarthy out there doing anything when he doesn't have that number one receiver to start building chemistry with. And the same thing for Sam Darnold. I mean, they want to
Yeah,
win this
yeah.
year. Like, you can't go through the whole summer
And I don't
just.
and I don't think that alone would drive any decisions, but it just feels like, if you're saying like we gotta, we have to, get to that middle point by then, like that's a pretty good goal to have and pretty reasonable goal. I don't think that they would like say, well, we're going to give him an extra $1 million a year just because we want him there on the first day of training camp. But it would certainly be good if that's the way it works out.
I think it would accelerate what like deadlines make deals,
Yeah,
but the deadline in their mind should be before that. And
yeah,
if you were telling me that it cost one extra $1 million to get him on the field for OTAs, minicamp, all that stuff, I'd be like, whatever. Just that's an accounting round error for a franchise worth $7 billion.
all
So
right, fair enough.
I think it will happen sooner than later. Kevin Seifert, well, great to have you on the show. Appreciate it.
Fun to
And
be here.
have to say, I'm glad that we were not talking about them missing all the quarterbacks,
Yeah,
Spencer Rattler. Then it would have been a calamity. So I'm glad that you were wrong.
catastrophe, calamity, whatever word you want to use. I'm happy to have provided the angst and absorbed the angst as opposed to people just being randomly nervous about it.
They're always nervous. So anyway, well, thanks for your time, and
Sure.
we'll see you soon.
Okay. Thank you.